Startuprad.io, your podcast and YouTube blog covering the German startup scene with news, interviews, and live events.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Joe from Startuprad.io, your startup podcast and YouTube blog from Germany. Right now I do have the great pleasure to have Lucy here with me. She is one of the co-founders of a unicorn based in Asia, and I do have the pleasure to have her here because right now by accident she's in my time zone, and she's one of the third of people I like to bring you because they're interesting and they're not from Germany, because if there's something that's really global, it's financial markets and the startup world. And Lucy, you're active in both. Hello, welcome. Huaning.
Hi, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
The pleasure's all mine. I've been stalking you a little bit on LinkedIn. So basically, I know you've been in banking, you've been in investment consulting, and what is all the stuff you did before? Because you told me you're mainland Chinese and you went to a university in Australia. Can you tell us just a little bit who Lucy is, what she likes to do, and how you ended up in your first few jobs before founding the startup?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in the northern part of China, and my family moved to New Zealand when I was probably in middle school. And then I did my university degree at Melbourne University. And after that, I think I just been in financial services, banking for my first few jobs before I co-founded Airwallex. Initially, it was summer internships at Chinese banks, and then I got a trainee program with Barclays based in Hong Kong. And then after that, during my master's degree, I also worked as an investment consultant. I quickly jumped into the startup world when I was only, I think, 25 years old. So fairly young at that time, but been enjoying the life since then.
I see. Admittedly, you don't look older than 25, but I'm just the guy. Having noticed you lived in New Zealand, are you a big rugby fan?
Yes, I am. All Blacks all the way.
For everybody who doesn't know, that's the New Zealand rugby team. For such a small country, they're really good, and they do make this haka at the beginning, and they dress in all black. Their national team, that's why they're called All Blacks. That is enough detour for now, and let's get a little bit into Airwallex. How do you started it, and where you got the idea from? Can you give us a little bit? Can you board us a little bit on your train of thought towards Airwallex?
Okay. So basically, Airwallex is a payments platform serving to businesses that want to expand globally. I think to give a bit of background, cross-border payments are slow, expensive, and complex. And, the SWIFT technology was invented in the 1970s. And for the past, a decade or so, the payments innovation has always been around consumers. So remittance, peer-to-peer transfers, and not enough on the business side. And, our two co-founders, Jack and Max, back in 2015 experienced it firsthand because they were running a café in Melbourne, and they had to import a lot of products such as coffee cups, paper wraps from China. And using the cross-border payment back then was it was very hard. And, they were transferring, I think, $15,000 to China, whether via Western Union or via local bank in Australia. It ended up costing about $700 in fees and FX spreads. And that's, I guess, where the initial idea of Airwallex came from, because we wanted to improve the inefficiencies by offering a cheaper, easier, and more scalable alternative to the SWIFT payments and also what the banks were offering.
Oh, let's take a little bit detour on global capital markets, FX trading, and Swift. So basically, Swift is like, I would say, an intrabank messenger system. As you said, it was invented very early on, just with a simple idea: money could not move between all the banks that fast across the globe. So basically, it was one consultancy setting up like a messenger system between the banks, and basically the idea is there are a lot of different message texts, they are empty, whatever, and basically you can tell a lot to another bank via this secure system. But basically a lot of banks till the early 2000s received the message, okay, the money will be coming, and they did not do anything until the money really arrived. So it's a little bit counterintuitive to what the system was originally thought, but it was the first attempt to do really fast money transfers, because before that it was really, really slow. And compared to like that old world, how you guys are actually working, and how would a client use you? For example, how would a small cafe in Melbourne use your service?
So, put it quite, like straightforward and transparently. It's what we do is we build our own local payment networks. If you think about Europe, you have SEPA, and UK has fast payments, and well, I would say most of the developed countries and developing countries have a relatively efficient local payment network. And the way Airwallex works is that we build into these local settlement systems, and connecting directly and tapping into the local networks allows us to become an alternative to what was slow, and removing all the intermediary banks in between. So I think from the front end, the customers don't actually realize how the money arrived from one point to another. But on the back end, basically what happens is, instead of going through all of the different banks in between, the money goes from one bank to another directly, because we have that direct connection. And we are able to find the most efficient route, because we've built all of this into our algorithm, and all of these things are decided by our system, how money goes from one country to another.
We also may add, especially in the case of China, but also for other currencies, currency is not freely convertible. That means you cannot just go out and say, I got 5 million in euros to pay, just change it into renminbi and everything will be fine. Can you talk a little bit about that, how you're dealing with that?
Yeah, sure. I think, a lot of businesses and individuals don't realize how difficult it is to do foreign exchange until they actually have exposure to that currency. If you think about euro to US, GBP to euros, it's all quite, like the liquidity is there. So, and there's no restrictions between the exchange. But when you're trading in Asia, going into countries like China, and also, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, any of those currencies that don't have any offshore liquidity. So it means that you can't exchange into that currency outside of that country. And then it becomes very difficult. And a lot of times you don't realize that the money is not being transferred until 1 or 2 months later, and the banks comes back and the money bounces back. So what happens is that we work with regional banks in those regions and set up the local relationships with the regulators and with these banks who are authorized to exchange into those currencies, and ensures that the money arrives and there is full support and full transparency along the way.
Talking about offshore, so basically when you trade like US dollar in the US, it's called onshore, and everything else is just offshore. And a lot of countries, it's very hard to get for example, the currency of Tanzania somewhere abroad, because it's not very liquid. Not many banks have it at hand, so that can be really troublesome to actually get your hands just on the currency to be able to pay it. And I would be interested, you hinted at basically you always have like one bank you're working with and you transfer directly in between those banks, and they then use the local like transfer area. For example, in Europe there's the single European payment area called SEPA, and basically in between the European banks can transfer money very fast. But if you then go like outside to Africa, to Asia, to South America, North America, it again gets troublesome to do that, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I think, there are two parts to this. One, like you mentioned, the currency itself may be restricted and it may be very difficult to get hands on. And another part is the like cross-border system itself is not as efficient as within a certain region or within a certain country. So the way we work is that we work with actually multiple banks, not just one, because you can't bet all your life on one partner. But also I think certain banks are good at different things. And even global banks like JP Morgan, Standard Chartered, Deutsche Bank, they don't have the network into every single country. As a result, we are sort of, in a way, forced to work with multiple banks, and some of the banks that we work with only have strong presence within one country. For example, in China, we work with ICBC or some of the third-party payment providers, and et cetera, et cetera. So we replicate that process in most of the countries that we support. But that said, we don't necessarily need like a banking partner in every single country. We do support 130 countries, and some of that is actually via SWIFT, just because the demand is not as high, but because we know exactly the route that money is taking, even via SWIFT is quite efficient.
Mm-hmm. I see. And my thoughts are now, so basically, what are you guys doing differently than, for example, a bank in Melbourne would do to transfer the money? Could you talk a little bit about that? What makes your Airwallex unique?
So I think what makes Airwallex unique is what we are, in a way, customized to help business scale. So whether it's to make batch payments across the border, is to trade different currencies simultaneously, or to allow the smaller businesses to access to institutional type of financial products. And in a way, like, the banks are very segmented in their services. So when you walk into a bank in Melbourne or anywhere else, you automatically get labeled. So whether you're an individual customer, you're a business customer, corporate customer, institutional customer, and the service that multinational banks, the service that multinational companies get from the bank is very different to what a smaller business or a cafe gets. And I think at Airwallex, we don't really distinguish that. We do have like API solutions for the more technical companies, but the level of support, the access to our product is not different for smaller customers or bigger customers. And I think at the end of the day, we're all about doing things at scale. So whether you need to make thousands of transactions at once, or you need to pay to 50 countries at the same time, you're all able to do that quite fast and instantaneously through our solutions. And we're all about end-to-end. So we help customers with collecting money in different countries, paying to different countries, And if you do that with a bank, what they do let you do is like do all of these steps separately. You can't do it all at once. You have one product for collection, you have one product for FX, and one product for payout. And I think that is not how businesses operate these days, especially internet companies in the digital age. They want to do things at scale and quickly and transparently. And yeah, I think, that's what makes Airwallex very different.
I have been smiling when I've been listening to you, because all those different services, they're usually conducted by different teams within different banks, and they all have their own P&L, and everybody wants to get most out of it, and it totally makes sense to like combine this. Talking a little bit about the startup and your role in it, because you're co-founder of a unicorn, which is quite special, and I would be interested in telling a little bit the story of the startup, important steps, and I would be very curious at the moment you realize, oh, I'm now co-founder of a unicorn. What did feel differently?
I think, going back to the beginning, there was only, 5 of us in a very small room. I always say I admire the first person who joined us, because it's not easy to, ditch your, like stable job at a bigger company to join a startup. So I wouldn't have done that actually. If I'm not a founder and I was, working regularly and I have this opportunity, it would take me a lot more time and courage. And I think over time, your role as a co-founder evolves and changes. Early days, we basically just did everything, from writing the codes. My co-founder wrote the codes. We did fundraising ourselves. We did marketing ourselves, finance, legal, everything. And as the team grew, you obviously bring in people with different experiences who are experts in the different fields that we require. And your role as a co-founder then becomes a people manager. You become more strategic. You look at things at a larger scale, at a higher level, instead of focusing on the details of operations and focusing on the details of execution. And in terms of the label unicorn, I don't think it's a nice, it sounds nice, but I would say valuation is something that happens as a result of what you did well in the company. It's not really a milestone itself. Valuation means nothing if there is no, like growth within the business. Actually, I spent the last few days in Lisbon at Web Summit, and people are always saying unicorns and like founders of unicorns or things like that. But realistically, it didn't really feel very different the moment we got the money or the moment we didn't get the money. But I think what changes how, I guess, you develop as a co-founder of the business itself, because I always share like a very interesting stat that I heard from my friends in Silicon Valley, is that the average time that a CEO of a startup that stays as the CEO is 3 years, and a lot of people aren't able to develop themselves in a way that is good for the business in the long term, or you grew fast enough with the business. And I think that's something that's very challenging, but also quite interesting as a co-founder.
That really sounds like a great journey. Can you tell us a few tweaks, a few books, a few inspirations you had to like accompany you on your journey there?
I think as we grew, like over the past 3 years, we were able to become more exposed to other founders. founders of unicorns or listed companies, or people who have, been there, done that. And a lot of the inspirations and I guess lessons we learned were by just simply talking to these people. And you build that network of support. You have that commonality between different founders. And I think being able to meet and just discuss or even WhatsApp about it really helps, because then you're not really alone, or you feel stuck, and someone is there to help you. And even now, I meet founders of smaller startups, and I'm happy to share with them as well, because I know how difficult it is.
I see. Just one more goofball question at the end of our very interesting interview. If you could describe your life either as a movie or as a book title, or a combination of both, what would it be and why?
The funny thing is, when people watch The Intern, the American comedy with Anne Hathaway in it, they always think of me because I'm like a female founder, and I have a daughter now. And people would joke about it as I'm kind of workaholic, and I have husband and children at the same time. But it's cool to see that it's not just me. It's actually quite stereotype of female founders. I don't tend to like putting the gender label on founders, just because I feel like men or not, female or not, people are people, and it shouldn't really make a difference. But it does kind of make a difference as a mom now that I have a daughter. So that was very interesting, and I enjoy the movie a lot. And and people look at me and they think of that movie as well.
I became a dad just a few months ago, and every time I see my small boy, it kind of helps me to kind of forget the rest of the world, and just being with him in this moment. And that helped me quite a lot, because it's like a very small vacation.
Yes, exactly. I think, people talk about work-life balance a little bit too much, and there's a new phrase now called work-life integration. And it feels very much like that for me, because I don't really tend to distinguish between working life or life. But you find a way to make it work, and it's always so enjoyable, being a founder and being a mom. I always joke about my daughter being my second startup, and my startup being my first grown child as well. And and it does feel like that sometimes. So it's very interesting and exciting at the same time.
Well, very interesting insights. Only thing for me left to say is thank you very much, 谢谢你, and hope to see you again sometime.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bye.
That's all, folks. Find more news, streams, events, and interviews at www.startuprad.io. Remember, sharing is caring.